Let's be a little more interactive. Has anyone like broken anything or been to like a medical scanner for anything? Okay. X-ray, CT, MRI, all the above? No. Okay, sweet. So back pre-COVID, pre-kids, when I was a little better in shape, I tore my ACL playing soccer. So they did an MRI to understand what the soft tissue was like. But that number for all this advanced imaging is going up. And so it's very costly for the hospital system. And something that's interesting, there's a study by Harvard Health that there's going to be 80 million CT images that are going to be taken almost annually, which is a huge number. And so the interesting about these CT images, it causes a lot of radiation, but they only report like a single metric or a very small detail of your condition. So for my MRI, for example, they did the 3D scan. It took like an hour just being in the MRI scanner, and they just said, "Hey, you have a torn ACL." I was like, "Thanks, doctor, I knew that." So essentially, what they do is they only provide a small metric. They don't even show you the image, and so this is kind of ripe for the pickings for a lot of the AI-based tools or radiologic tools. They're trying to go and analyze these medical images to see if they can get different information and provide robust confirmation or just for the patient to understand better. So I won't bore you. This is actually from like an academic talk. So this one doctor, Phelps et al., said that when patients see their images, they understand their condition better. It doesn't make them feel better though. It just basically confirm what they have. So this is going to be very high level view. I would encourage you all to just take a look at different things that you see, but kind of in my field, we do computational biomechanics. So this is mathematical based modeling, where you simulate blood pressure, blood flow even, and understand how it interacts on vascular tissues. So for this condition, AAA, we have the simulation where we pressurize to idealized systolic pressure, which is 120 millimeters of mercury. So anytime you get your blood pressure, top number is your high pressure, and then the bottom number is your lower pressure, which is kind of the return, pulse. So for this pipeline, I know it looks really messy. Essentially, someone has to take a medical image, go slice by slice, and trace where the aneurysm is. So that's what you're seeing in this red and blue. And like most people, I don't want to sit and waste my life tracing something by hand. So a lot of these new deep learning techniques allow you to actually automatically segment and try to get the region of interest. We may disagree, but I don't know if they'll ever be perfect just because all the scanners are different and the boundaries are what really need to be segmented. And it's always variable. Anywho, we do 3D modeling, so we convert those slice by slice into something called a point cloud. We create a mesh, and then we apply theoretical or simulated pressure and understand how the material behaves under that loading scenario. So that's a stress analysis. So this top pipeline A is the traditional one that's been used for over 30 years in literature. And for aneurysms, there's only 350 patients for AAA at least that were performed using this method over a 30-year period. So it's actually not that much if you think about it. So this bottom pipeline, I kind of worked on my postdoc this automatic way because maybe I'm lazy, but I was like, we can do this better, we can do this faster. So rather than using a lot of complex tools in math, we can just use some deep learning models to, well, it is also complicated math as well, but we can use some deep learning, machine learning to segment, but also predict the stresses on that geometry in 20 seconds. So that top pipeline, up to 24 hours, including the simulation time, 4 hours of manual segmentation, and you just kind of hate your life after a day or two when you do that. So this is kind of a theoretical thing that we're working on. I'm just going to put it all out there, but we're trying to give more advanced metrics from medical images. So can we visualize the stress field from medical images? And that's the kind of the precursor to that is actually having an automatic way to segment plus run the stress models and then visualize it in HoloLens or any Apple Pro, what, your cup of tea, or I guess you guys have Oculus, looks like, yeah. Any AR, VR system, you can visualize this, and this could maybe potentially help clinicians and patients interact in a different way that's not, normal. So what happens is you go in, get a scan, they'll call you back and tell you, hey, you have an aneurysm, it's this size. But we can actually provide a lot more different information than that. So I'm going to kind of go really fast to this, but do this stuff here. But machine learning, it's I don't know, I don't want to call it the most basic level of AI, but it's a category of AI. But essentially, what you have to do is there's like a lot of pre-processing involved, figuring out what variables you want to use as inputs, and what your target variable is for outputs. So we use supervised learning, which means that we know what our target is. So anytime you have some regression or you're trying to predict like a continuous variable, that's regression. So if you're trying to guess someone's age, that would be regression. If you're trying to guess someone's smoking status, which is binary, like you smoke or you don't smoke, then that would be more classification. So there's kind of two different buckets in that. So again, I don't want to bore you too much. I guess it's almost 11:30 now, but so we trained the regression models to predict the wall stresses from the 3D surface of aneurysms. I'm going to do a little hand waving here, but what we like to do is actually split the data set so that we have a hold-up testing set for validation rather than doing some internal validation. So I don't know if this is like resonating with anyone here. But essentially, if you took this whole room, put all your information down, and then you took the whole room again and inputted 20% of whatever information that you provided and try to predict something, that would actually be easy to do because you're including that pool for training. So the higher bar is don't even look at 20 people in this room and try to generate a model that can predict something from the 20 people not seen by the algorithm in training. Some people would argue that this is still considered internal validation because you're still in the same room, you'd be in a different classroom somewhere across the country, kind of thing. But essentially what we did, we just took 75% around for training and then took 25% reserved for testing that we removed from the data set and try to predict the wall stresses. And there's, some simple metrics. We take slope, root mean square error, R-squared values to understand how well we're doing. So the closer you get to 1 or that line of unity, the more perfect your prediction is for regression. So I'm gonna, okay. So this is actually the result of that. So this right panel that you see is actually the computation simulation where you just do the stress analysis that takes about 4 or 5 hours per patient. And then we have these different models that we predicted the wall stresses on the surface. You can kind of see the fine tree. I don't know if you guys know the structure, but it's a decision tree based, so it's very discrete. It almost looks like a Surratt painting where it's pointillism. So for our models here, the neural networks were actually the highest performing for predicting wall stresses, and this is kind of something that we extracted from that. So this is the HoloLens. We have a simple implementation, but essentially we're visualizing these 3D models and the different wall stresses. Sorry, the lab's a mess, but okay, that's where we work from. So you can go around the model and see the stress levels. So for aneurysms, the high stress is on the back, which is near the spine, and you can see that you have a red spot on the back. So we're trying to develop different tools that clinicians can use for visualization, but not only visualization, but also provide some robust metrics to understanding when a patient might need repair or when they might rupture. So this is kind of new in the space, but this is more like kind of the customer or the patient interface down the road. So this other plot here is, it's kind of a box plot, it's a raindrop plot is what we call it, but just essentially gives you the percentile and the distribution for where this patient's stress is relative to the population. So this is something that we're working towards. The metaverse, some people say it's died in the car crash, but people are still putting a lot of energy into how we can utilize and use these tools for medical applications. So I do think there's some utility there. So we're going to take a commercial break. This is kind of the end of that kind of talk. So any questions or just a stretch? I don't know if you guys drink coffee or if you guys have natural interviews. Any questions on that stuff that I just showed or presented? All right.
I have a question.
Yep.
How accurate was you have numbers?
Yeah, so I guess we have RMSEs and R squared, so it's the percent error is what's respectable. So the one metric that we do present is something called mean wall stress, the average stress in the whole surface, and the peak wall stress, which is 99th percentile. So we plotted what the AI predicted versus what we did from hand calculations or from the simulation. The R squares actually aren't that great for the peak wall stress, but they're respectable for the mean wall stress. So essentially, I don't know how deep you guys want to go, but an R squared value, if it's 0.7, it's okay. But you say that 0.3 is like 30% is due to some random effect that's not attributed to your model. So that's how you can interpret that.
But that's really goes to show that what man is that how much.
Yeah, so the slope would actually, it's about 96% towards a perfect prediction.
That's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Machine can say 90%. That's good as a
Yeah, so it's a 4% underestimation or whatever the slope number is. Interpret that way. I think I saw a hand back there, Thomas.
Yeah, like this might be a dumb question, but like, how did, because we kind of worked on something using a machine learning in like the healthcare area as well, but we found like our data generally to not have like a linear, like generally our data don't happen to be linear, so we ended up using like cubic regression. I was wondering how your data is able to be like so linear.
Yeah, so this kind of gets into mechanics. So like we do a lot of experimental testing. So how you actually get the stresses is you pull on tissue and then you understand how much strain or stretch versus how much force or stress, and you have that relationship. And for the most practical point, the stress is very linear to the strain. And so this is why it's actually so linear, so well done. And I don't want to get pooped on by the colleagues in the simulation space, but I'm going to say that's true of like a lot of these models that people run. It's very linear, so you can get away with this kind of surrogate method.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so we're going to move over to deep vein thrombosis. So we do a lot of medical device design as well. So this one is kind of marrying AI, so machine learning, plus a device design. So you guys probably have some Arduino experience or some Raspberry Pi maybe, and some sensors. So I'll just kind of explain what we're doing here. But essentially, deep vein thrombosis, it actually is a huge problem in America. So 900,000 people have it. And then 50% of people that will have DVT transition to something called PTS, which is post-thrombotic syndrome. It's a chronic condition of blood clotting. And so what happens, your leg just swells up and it's permanently swelled up. You can't go to work, it's just painful. So essentially, you have these one-way valves. So again, your cap muscles push blood up and blood flows up and these valves close and then it kind of holds the blood in place. So that's how your calves push up blood. And then what happens with DVT, PTS, these valves get damaged so that the blood just kind of flows backwards and then it starts pooling your leg. So that's why it's such a big problem. And so this what happens with PTS is your vein is completely gone, or your shunt is gone, and so that blood just constantly pulls up, and that's when the swelling occurs. So not to scare you, but once you get PTS, there's no going back from it. You can't reverse the damage, and there's nothing you can do clinically. So what we're trying to do is develop a kind of a fancy blood pressure cuff that can predict when someone might develop PTS. And so this happens when the patient comes in, has DVT, deep vein thrombosis, and you can be like, oh, this patient's at high risk of developing this chronic condition. So what we're going to do is we're going to give them more anticoagulants, which is like aspirin or warfarin, or we can give them high regimen of compression therapy, which is just very tight socks essentially. So what we're doing here is a biomechanics-based approach. So there's a concept called compliance. So the more compliant something is, the more stretchy it is. So vascular surgeons, they speak in terms of compliance. So stretchy means you can extend and move and expand it really well, which you want for veins. So what we're trying to measure using acoustic signals or sound sensors is the noise that your blood flow makes, and try to relate that to compliance. And so that's kind of what we're doing. So our hypothesis would be normal vein, most compliant, so you have a lot more noise. DVT would be less compliant, which has less noise, and then obviously PTS with the least, because blood can't even hold itself. It's just going to be pooling constantly. So we designed this cuff. So it's a fancy blood pressure cuff with piezoelectric sensors, so vibration sensors. We actually use 3 Arduino Nanos. The reason why we use 3 is because you want to be able to simultaneously record signals as fast as you can. So there's a latent period from when you collect the data versus what happens in real time. And if you don't capture all of those, then you might be getting a false signal. So there's something called a Nyquist sampling frequency. So if you don't have 2 times your sampling rate, then you can't recover the curve. And so you want to be able to recover whatever curve that you're trying to measure. And then we have this Python GUI that can read all these sensors in real time and plot them. So that's what it looks like in real life. It's kind of a mess of a bunch of wires. We'll get towards printing our own circuit board. But essentially that's the real-time voltage versus time plots of all the sensors. And so what you're reading right now is we're pressurizing the cuff. So we're just using a hand pump so you can kind of see the peaks. And then at some point we just release the pressure, and then you kind of see the curve kind of coming down. And the curve coming down is actually the acoustic noise from your blood flow returning back into that space or refilling that space. So what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna use the medical device, get the signals, add a lot of clinical data, and try to predict using some machine learning when this patient might potentially develop PTS or DVT. So classify them. So again, classification is different than regression. You're just trying to put them in bins. If you can put them in bins at the time of diagnosis, then you can be like, hey, let's just try to give them a different treatment course than the standard of care. And so that's what we're trying to do with this project here. So it's been rebranded to Delta Cuff. It was like thrombosis differentiating pressure cuff, but that was a little cumbersome to keep saying. All right, any questions on that? That's kind of the commercial break for the end of this medical device. So there's a lot of companies. Edwards Life Science actually has some AI implementations with some of their medical devices at the moment, where they can, find out when a device will fail preemptively. So, yeah. Any questions or? All right, let's keep going. So this AAA repair, again, we talked about the condition of AAA, but they actually do have methods to repair your aneurysm. So once it hits a threshold, 5 centimeters for females and then 5.5 for males, You can actually offer 2 different types of treatment.